Hey class, good to see you. I know a lot of you have been interested in this interview that I've been talking about for the last few weeks. It's with Dylan Butler. I've known him from the conference scene here in Los Angeles for several years, and we've grown to have a friendship as a result of our affinity for technological movements and what's going on in the blockchain space. So I'll just introduce him on. How's it going, Dylan?
Hey, thanks, Rob. Really happy to be here. Yeah, I've heard a lot about this program, and yeah, I'm really excited for what you're doing, and happy to share whatever experiences I've learned and impart whatever I can.
I think that we came in right around the same time, and the conference in 2019 or 2018 at the LA Blockchain Week, which was then Crypto Investor Summit. And I think we started talking about some interesting proof of storage projects that were doing some interesting stuff that now have had many projects that have derived from that original project in the intervening years. But you've actually been in tech well before that time and have had sort of an interesting circuitous path where you've gained all sorts of competencies. Can you just run like some of the students by exactly what your involvement with tech is and really broader law before that?
Yeah, sure. It's hard to pick a starting point, but yeah, I went to college to learn Flash, and then Flash quickly it became evident that that wasn't going to last. But ActionScript and JavaScript are ECMAScript, and so I learned JavaScript. I got some good advice to really learn JavaScript quite well, and it made sense. I basically bet the farm on JavaScript being kind of the language of the future, right? It's in browser. You can see as you code, you can see what you're doing, and it's very sort of immediate gratification. And so it's kind of like painting with pixels. And so for me, I kind of have an artistic side, and I've always loved that about it. So I was fortunate to join an agency while in college and work on some really good websites, some top brands there. From there, I went on to a startup in San Diego, where my claim to fame is I built the Pizza Hut pizza builder. So if you've ever ordered Pizza Hut, you've probably seen my work, but this was many years ago. And then from there, I actually pivoted into law for a brief moment and decided to go to law school. Took the bar, passed the bar, met my wife, and decided it really wasn't for me. It was actually a no-brainer. It was much better to go back to tech, and it was just a no-brainer for me personally. And so, especially at the time, the conditions for new attorneys weren't that great starting out. So this was around 2011. So now that I went back to tech, I moved up to Orange County to join my wife, and I joined PlayStation actually to help with their cloud gaming division. It was an acquired startup called Gaikai. We did cloud gaming, so I think Netflix of video games. And there I mostly focused on front-end internal tooling, building out a UX org and a front-end engineering org on the cloud engineering side. Later on, we merged with R&D, and so then that became really interesting, doing more R&D kind of work, but also it's still through the front-end lens in browser. Meanwhile, on the side, I've been moonlighting doing Web3 stuff for the past 4 years or so. Yeah, I met Rob pretty early on at a conference, and we hit it off. And yeah, I noticed right away that he's super deep into the space as well. And so yeah, I've been in that space. I've written a few wallets and been a core member on some teams, managed communities, and got to wear a lot of hats. And now I'm at ConsenSys, director of engineering at a team called Codify. And we work on projects like MetaMask. Probably if you've used wallets, a crypto wallet, you might be familiar with MetaMask, as well as a bunch of other really exciting stuff. So yeah, I'm really excited to now be central into the space and to help shape the future of Web3.
It seems like over the last certainly decade that LA has really come into its own as it relates to tech. The conference is there. You're seeing more and more VCs kind of come down from the Bay, where it's historically been so strong. What's it been like in like Orange County, which is really like the suburb of LA, when it comes to like the tech scene? I guess the Sony has been there, and then as a result, they have surrounding tech companies that kind of feed to that ecosystem. But has tech always been kind of strong, as you can see it in your part of Orange County?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of tech people here. but I wouldn't say it's like a strong tech area. There's for sure more jobs in San Diego and LA and the Bay, obviously. So Orange County, there are jobs here. Amazon is here. Twitch started here. Of course, PlayStation has a presence here, as well as, let's see, Microsoft and a bunch of other, fairly large names. So we're not alone. Did I say Google? There's also a Google office here, sales. And let's see, they're out there. So it's like, if you live in Orange County, you do tech, you can find a job out here for sure. That said, there's not a lot of a lot of the companies that are here, I would say, aren't fully remote, if that makes sense. Blizzard's also here, Activision Blizzard. So, but a lot of these companies are still requiring some form of on-site. Also, Rivian is from Irvine. It's another recent IPO that's here.
Yeah, and even before the pandemic, when everyone is trying to get familiarized with people working with decentralized coworkers, or the DAO movement move forward because of people are saying that, wow, you can actually do things and not have every member of the executive team right there in front of you. Like, was that an education, having people at, in Japan and other parts of the world that you're having to communicate and do these presentations to? And like, what was that experience of having to coordinate, like over Zoom or Skype, I guess would have been back in the day? Was that an education in collaborating across many miles of distance?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, Sony is the first, well, I mean, even back in my startup days, I worked with global teams. So, global is always a challenge, but it's quite rewarding, and, you make it work. So it depends on obviously the locale and who you're working with, but there are things you can do. So what I like it, so this is my first fully remote first gig. And there are some really nice takeaways that I can mention, kind of like, setting your working hours. So we use Google Suite, G Suite, and setting your working hours in there so that when people invite you to a meeting, they know whether or not, you're available. In Slack, set your time zone, even in your name. That's largely helpful when dealing with people. So yeah, there's some pro tips involved with working remotely, but in general, what we found, or what I found, and what I think a lot of leaders are learning, is that you tend to want your teams to be sort of geographically co-located, and that means keeping product teams with people that are in near enough time zones such that they can work together, because there really is an advantage to being able to work alongside one another, even if you're remote. Having a 12-hour delay between one another does impact things, from timeline to morale, to a number of other things. So yeah, what we found is people being geographically co-located is the way to go.
There's so many strong tech scenes like around the world, and I wonder, from your perspective, because we have a lot of students that they're like generalist in tech, like they're getting JavaScript under their belt, they're getting a little bit of Python, and they're trying to hit the SoCal tech scene and get kind of hired. Can you provide a little bit of behind the curtain in terms of, when you get like a recommendation to like interview this person and you invite them in, like, what's the process kind of like from the hiring perspective? Like, what are you looking for in someone to join your team that would be a good contribution member to your team to add value?
Well, so it depends on the role, right? So when you open a job rec, you have something in mind, right? You have already sold this idea to the business that you need this bad enough that the company needs to pay for it, basically in perpetuity, right? Because you don't hire employees for a short-term amount of time. That would be a contractor in most cases. And so you've justified the need for this position. And so then from there, everything kind of flows from that. So you write the rec, and then presumably an applicant finds the rec somehow and they apply. So then from there, it goes actually to typically a recruiter who's screening these applicants. And so, you mentioned a referral. So in this context, a referral would probably bypass the screener and go directly to the hiring manager. In which case, so usually a recruiting man or sorry, a recruiter would screen it and then give it to the hiring manager who would screen it themselves. And so basically you're skipping one step and the hiring manager is then going to screen it depending on their relationship with this person, right? If this person is highly regarded and they say, hey, I trust this person. And if I say this person's good, they're good. Well, then the hiring manager will probably set up either a phone screen or some sort of initial interview. But there have been times where I get a referral and I just say, sorry, it's just, this isn't good enough or this, and then it's just simply a matter of explaining, hey, this isn't quite the role, or this person is maybe too junior or whatever, and it's just not for this role, but we'll keep them, keep them in mind for something else. It's fine. So, but typically there's going to be, so speaking in terms of like blue chip companies and like the company, Silicon Valley, kind of the companies that are hiring, standard tech process, give or take, is going to go the same way. You're going to have a recruiter screen where they contact you to see if you're a good fit, talk about your resume, talk about the position, answer any questions. During this recruiter screen is when you want to ask for the salary range, as well as any other like pertinent information. In California, they have to provide you that information, so you should definitely ask. And then if you and the recruiter are still happy with the arrangement after that, then you move forward to the next stage, which is like a manager phone screen. And you get to meet typically some hiring manager who will phone screen and make sure that you indeed meet the description that you seem to set on your resume. And then if you pass that, then you'll typically jump in. This is where it kind of varies, but there will be some form of a technical interview, a values interview. So there's like a skills assessment, a values assessment, and then somewhere there might be a coding exercise, depending on the company. They'll, in between the manager screen and the meeting of the other sort of panels, there will be a coding challenge. The coding challenge might be a take-home challenge. Ideally, they'll say, hey, spend no more than 2 to 3 hours on this, because they want to know what you can do in 2 to 3 hours. So you shouldn't spend more than 2 to 3 hours on it. I personally try not to issue coding challenges because I try to be mindful of an applicant's time, but I understand why some companies do it, and a lot of companies do. So it's something you kind of have to be prepared for. And then, yeah, of course, if you pass all of those, then there will be an offer stage. Some companies, by the way, will hire sort of generically. So they have a pipeline of candidates and they'll say, you're interviewing for a software engineering position. So you're going to meet a panel of people who are going to ask you kind of the same questions that they ask everyone else. And it's very cookie cutter. And this is, a lot of large companies do this. This is what Google does, Amazon, and most of the large ones, because it's more efficient that way. When you have a large pool of candidates, you want to have a large funnel. And if you have a lot of teams hiring, then it helps. But if they do this, then there is often a round at the end where they try to match you with a team. And these can last several. I mean, there can be multiples of these. I have a friend who just got hired at Google in Irvine, and he said he had 10 interviews. And I think the last 3 or 4 interviews were all matching, him trying to find a good match. And if you don't find a good match, they pass on you. So you could ace the interview and then just not find a team that likes you or that you like necessarily, or you jive with, and that just doesn't work. And that's how the world works. So that is typically how this goes. So if the team, however, is hiring for a specific role, then chances are, if you make it through that interview process, then you're going to get to that offer stage, and they're going to make you some offer, and yeah, it's going to be a good day.
What do you think about Google's push? Like, they have, and they're saying that with their certificates, that they're actively going to hire based on the education that they're going to be providing you in the certificate form. So I know when I went to the conference room floor at LA Blockchain Week and other ones, that I was amazed at how many of the heads of engineering of these really big departments at Point Market Cap or whatever were not themselves bachelor's or master's in coding. They're self-taught.
Yeah.
And do you have thoughts on like MOOCs or these online classes or Coursera or edX? Like, if someone comes to you and says that I know this language, then you're going to just look to see that they're actually as competent as they represent themselves to be. But what are your thoughts on online learning as a whole?
Online learning is great. I mean, for the driven individual, you can learn everything you need to know for free, right? Probably just with YouTube. So credit to Google for that. Also on Google's sort of grooming practices, right? They groom engineers fresh out of college to be Google engineers, and they have a very good system. They've gotten very good at it. They have multiple open source projects where they've sort of finessed the art. One of those is Angular. You get Angular certified. Google has very little actual Angular developers working for them on payroll. Almost the majority of the contributions come from open source developers who actually pay for the privilege to work on the project. So it's quite a good system they've figured out. And more power to them. They were able to do that. But so you asked about MOOCs and online classes, and so I think if you are driven and you want to learn Web3, it's a great opportunity, and it's like a low risk kind of low commitment way to learn if that's actually something you want to do. It depends on which one you do, right? Some are probably more expensive than others. I don't know the cost. But I don't, and that being said, so I'm a front end hiring manager of many years, and I don't even really know, there's no prestigiousness in terms of these online schools that enters my calculus, at least. Yeah, sure, maybe an Ivy League university on your resume, of course, is interesting and is a talking point, and hopefully, you have a very good story to tell around that. But it's definitely not something that makes or breaks any part of the resume process or the interview process for me. For me, it's all about skills. Like I have an example that I'll just mention real quick. We had one gentleman who I was interviewing him for an internship because he had just graduated coding boot camp. And I could tell right away that he knew his stuff. And he was actually a barista at Starbucks at the time. And I asked, I had a junior headcount also open. And I said, hey, I have a junior full-time headcount open. Would you like to interview for that instead? Like it's different from the internship program. Like, it's a different thing, but it's a full-time gig. Would you be interested in doing that? And he said, absolutely. He came in and he was one of the best interviewees we've ever had. I mean, for any position, and he knocked it out of the park. So to me, that was it was just proof right there that it really doesn't matter what your background is, or what your current job or whatever. If you come in and you know your stuff and you've done the work, that's all that matters.
That's refreshing to hear, and I would echo that, especially in Web3, because it's so new too. You don't have time to get a degree, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter at all. No, I mean, a lot of these guys, they're anonymous. Their name doesn't even matter, right? And so, I mean, think about that. It's if you can send somebody your GitHub or whatever, or Twitter, and say, I am this, here's the proof is in all the contracts that I've written or deployed, or the startup that I built, or whatever, this community that I've grown. Results speak way louder than some school.
Yeah, the competency is good, and then just from our perspective too, if you can put out a resume on like a fast-moving technology, or something on your resume that has blockchain in it, that's the push for the blockchain certificate. And couple that with a known university, then a lot of times, even if it gets by or a little bit faster to a hiring manager, then I think it's, people have found some traction with the coursework as a result of that. When you started to get into tech professionally, were there some movements that jumped out at you as someone that was already interested in intellectual property and technically focused intellectual property, or what has excited you over the last few years about tech?
Over the past few years about tech, well, it's definitely been obviously crypto and Web3. But yeah, the one constant in my life has always been sort of front end, JavaScript, making websites, making apps, design, the visual side of things. So I keep coming back to it, and it's really interesting now. I see Web3 as kind of and blockchain as a coalescence and a convergence of all these what were once kind of disparate mediums and ideas, and now they're coming together so rapidly, right? You got the law meeting art, meeting IP, meeting code and engineering, and it's just coming together in this beautiful harmony, and I find myself at the center of it, and it called to me. So currently it's calling to me, and there's also other callings happening, like right now with what's happening in Russia and like climate change, and there's a ton of really strong calls happening in the world to make the world a better place. And I think this is definitely one of those areas.
Yeah, it seems like with a lot of the best engineers, they'll either be right-brained or left-brained, but few kind of dip on both sides like you do. Like, do you think that can that be learned, like the creativity for an engineer that spends so many years like dialing down the code, like to be able to also look at the warmth of the color palette and understand that the presentation is going to pop or not?
Oh God, I don't know. I don't know. It's some people. It's weird. I have friends who are like artists, and I would love to like collaborate with them. But I was like chatting with my wife, but they're just like not driven in that sense, you know. And it's like it will never happen because. And I texted them, and I texted them, and I say, hey, let's do a project together. Let's work together, and it just never happens. And so I don't know. Can you teach drive and ambition? I don't know, that might be one of those intangibles. That I don't know if you're born with it. You're probably, if you surround yourself with ambitious people, I think that'll certainly have some sort of rub on effect. But no, man, for me, it's just interesting. And I just like to, do what interests me. And so for me, it's not really work, just having fun.
Keep it on the law front. Do you think that intellectual property laws will be ironed out in the blockchain or Web3 space with so many jurisdictions? Or what are your thoughts on like copyrights or patents or trying to iron that out across borders?
Cross borders, well, I mean, even without blockchain, that's a loaded question. And I haven't been an attorney for a long time, and I only was for a few months, maybe, or a year. But I think in general, the law follows the technology. So tech leads, law follows. Founders are gonna do things. People are gonna do things. We're very inventive. We're very creative, and the law will always be trying to play catch up. And so it's, in my experience, better to ask for forgiveness. Be the early bird, and you obviously don't want to like, don't do anything illegal, don't get yourself in trouble, don't do anything unethical, right? Be ethical, but like, I think like sitting around and waiting for someone to tell you you can do something, that's probably a recipe for someone else to do it before you. And so it's better to be the early bird.
If you sold your house and the counterparty said, would you like the agreement to be drafted in a smart contract or a physical, like English-based contract, which do you feel more comfortable with these days?
Well, I mean, a smart contract would, it's it's hard to say because I mean, a smart contract, it's very easy for us to jump to comparisons between like a smart contract and like a traditional contract, but they're two different things. And so you may affect certain parts of your more or of your sort of house deed and ownership with a smart contract. You may represent your deed as a non-fungible token on the blockchain. You may have an agreement with you may have a mortgage agreement with a lender that is effectuated through the blockchain for efficiency reasons and transparency, and simply because it's more efficient to do that than to pay some company who's been doing it, and charging a ransom all these years. So I think it's like kind of overgeneralizing just to say, your house is on a smart contract, but like in general, yeah, I mean, well, I mean, having just refinanced recently, like if I can, first of all, not have a notary come over, that for in and of itself feels very old fashioned, right? Having a notary come over, like, is this really, what value is this really adding in this modern day and age? Certainly there are ways to prove one's identity without a notary present. And so, yeah, I think in general, the question is, would you prefer this legacy mechanism that involves paper and manual labor over something that is completely automatable and trustless? Yeah, for sure. Every day, go with the new thing.
Last month, or I guess it was a few months ago, I interviewed Brandon Millman of the Phantom Wallet project. So the number one Solana wallet.
Yeah, I have that. That's cool.
And I was just wanting to know, it seems like so many important projects are focused and surrounding the wallet. So it'll be, a Chrome extension or something on your phone. And it seems like that's like such a core important technology that is really like the prism onto blockchain. Like, why do you think so many of these wallets have done so well? Like, it's because it's your access and accessibility tool to get into the blockchain, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's an interesting lens. I saw a good tweet the other day. It said, we missed an opportunity by calling them wallets. We probably should have called them keychains, something along those lines. But to your point, a wallet is a bit of a monopoly game at this point, right? There are some leaders in the space who have a lot of users, and they're able to leverage that user base to great gain in some cases, right? They can send people at projects. They can, looking at Coinbase, right? They can onboard a project and completely change the market cap of that project overnight and make people incredibly, incredibly rich. That's a lot of power. But what's interesting is, so Coinbase is an exchange, and in addition to a wallet, they also have a wallet. But speaking just in terms of wallets, you just bring up, you may give me an idea where, like, I mean, hypothetically, if Apple if Apple integrated crypto into their, wallet app natively, that would be a problem potentially. It all depends on, the value prospect for the consumer. Like, if there's a new hot blockchain that comes out and the old wallet doesn't support it, or new wallets come around and they do something better, this industry moves very fast. And in general, I think the demographic is pretty young, and they're ready to, they aren't stuck on certain technologies. I think there's proof, studies that show that, like, the older you get, the more likely you are to be kind of stuck on the apps you use. This younger demographic's not stuck on a given app. And so, you really got to earn that user base.
Yeah, incredibly fast moving. You're right. For the last 3 years, I've isolated that NFTs, that DeFi certainly, and then DAOs have been just tsunamis of movements. Out of those three, what do you think is the one that jumped out at you that, like, wow, this I felt like was going to be increasingly a trend, and that has done a lot? Like, I would imagine being early to decentralized work by communicating across borders, that made sense. And then the putting value on the blockchain. I know that you were always thought that that would traction in the way that it did. And then coming from the artistic background, the decentralized art with the smart contract baking in the artist resale rights. So out of those three, is there anything that kind of popped out at you that, like, okay, it happened?
So I heard a while back when I was first getting into the space that, like, blockchain, and this is going to sound absurd, but I think there's some truth to it. Blockchain represents kind of one of the greatest inventions of humanity since, written language or currency itself. And I think that's kind of true in a lot of ways. And this was really when people were just thinking about blockchain in the context of cryptocurrency. They weren't really even, I think there was a lot of people not even understanding NFTs were even around back then. So now I think it's been even more true, and continues to be more true now, that as they're all good in their own way. I used to play Diablo 2 growing up, and so for me as a gamer, I see tremendous value in the blockchain and being able to bootstrap a marketplace, a secure marketplace that I know can't be, items that I create can't be duped, at least not easily. And if they could be duped, then that would be a multi-billion trillion dollar exploit. So I don't have to worry about that sort of thing. So I think for gaming that there's a huge opportunity there. And so for me, it's like there's opportunities everywhere. Obviously, DeFi and the traditional finance space is ripe for disruption. And that was what everybody was sort of like, okay, yeah, it's time. We finally have the capability to mathematically manage our own finances, which is huge. And I think that's a paradigm shift, and that's a fundamental sort of evolution in humanity. But on top of that, like, just digital rights ownership is also really interesting. And just, I don't know, like, it's just the whole idea of ownership and using technology and math to do things that were never possible. Zero knowledge proofs are super fascinating as well. And in removing centralized intermediaries, and even removing servers from systems. It's really changed the game.
Yeah, talking about centralized intermediaries, for the longest time, Russia wouldn't recognize ICANN. And so I'd be interested to hear like what your thoughts are on the alternative domain space, using IPFS, Chrome extensions to navigate people like away from the traditional web that's accessible. I know that you've done some work with some projects that have been pretty big in the alternative domain space, but it seems like there's a bunch of people that are aggressively, I think like Handshake, and there's a bunch of other ones that are trying to iterate and work with that space. So is that something that you think will continue to grow, or what are your thoughts on alternative domains as a whole?
Yeah, I think alternative domains are cool. There's a danger because if there's too many and they clobber each other, right? And you try to send to one and you're not sure who you're sending it to. This is showing its face right now in like the multi-chain world where you own a token on one chain that might not be the same token on another chain. Somebody could have deployed that a copycat token, and so you have to be really careful when you're swapping on chains, and there's a real risk to consumers there. So but that being said, obviously the convenience of like me being able to send money to rob.eth or to hacker.crypto, which I just bought last week. I think that's really cool. And like now that's my brand, right? So in general, I think it's a great thing. And like ICANN, yeah, ICANN is an association, right? And so like it is technically decentralized, I believe. I haven't like looked into this issue a lot, but that being said, it still is a single gateway for what is increasingly sort of the entry point for the internet. And I think it's important that people have options, especially ones that are private and open source and readily understood. So there was an outage a while back because some name servers were attacked, and there was it kind of showed that there weren't really that many parties involved in serving the fabric of the internet, and so that was kind of scary. So yeah, I think secondary alternative mechanisms for accessing content, IPFS, unstoppable domains, ENS, super cool stuff. Yeah, definitely. What's interesting about IPFS is if you look at like they do have a code of conduct, and they do have some ability to moderate content, and so it's not like permissionless in that sense. It's not decentralized or permissionless, but it is one step closer into that direction. And I don't know, there's always going to be some happy medium because people can do really bad things, and we have to guard that they don't. And so yeah, it's a very interesting time to be a part of this. But yeah,
Bitcoin kind of started it all, and it's a truly anonymous foundation because we don't really know who Satoshi Nakamoto is.
True.
But do you think like for every project that follows it, do you think it's acceptable to accept a cloak of anonymity for the executives and people that are leading a project? Or what are your thoughts on projects that, let's say, to make it more tame, they don't have a prominent executive team, but they do have a lot of stakeholders or community holders that are well known in the ecosystem that ape into their project? So is it a fine line? Because I'll just speak from my perspective on this one. I get nervous when I see generative art and people that purport that they're anonymous, like Bored Ape Yacht Club, but then it's like, wait a minute. Just there's a difference between being truly anonymous and just being not forthright with who's actually the leadership of the team. So coming from an art perspective, I'd be curious to know your thoughts on NFT projects as a whole. If you get an NFT, do you want to see like a visionary leader leading the project, or do you just want to see some sort of people organizing the steps? Or what are your thoughts on an anonymous projects kind of as a whole?
Well, I'll preface this by saying I only recently caught the NFT bug, very, very recently. And so for a while, I stayed away from the whole space because it just smelled. And, I couldn't afford anything. I was kind of late to it. And none of the projects really looked that great to me. All the ones that I and I'm a big fan of art, by the way. And so for me to see art projects that were like just too expensive and out of reach, it was a little bit sad. But on anonymity, I've worked with some really talented folks who are anonymous, pseudonymous, or whatever. And, I was even that for a long time because I was moonlighting and I was working at PlayStation. I did not want to, I didn't want to put anything at risk. And I think there's a lot of people out there who have a lot to lose and they don't want to risk anything, but they want to participate and they want to have fun and enjoy themselves. And I think that's what the space allows for. And that's actually kind of the whole ethos, right? Is like, it doesn't matter who I am. You can just go look and confirm for yourself. It's right there. And so I think there's a lot to that. And the people who follow it like religiously are, they're commendable. And they're the reason why we're here in the first place. They stuck to their ideals and made things possible because they wouldn't accept the status quo and reveal who they were or whatever, and figured out ways to do things trustlessly. And I think that's the whole ethos. And so without them, yeah, we wouldn't be here. So yeah.
I'll also say that from my vantage point, like when I invest in a project, I'll also look to see who's leading the efforts. And a lot of times it's like a charismatic tech leader that can communicate the use case and he knows the tech. And I know just from walking the conference floor that a lot of people that I would characterize to be charismatic tech leaders that know the space and know the technology. Like from your vantage point, what do you think it takes to be an effective leader in tech?
To be an effective leader in tech, I think it takes empathy, transparency, hard work and commitment and vision. You don't have to be like a great programmer. I was never a great programmer at all. And it takes a lot of training. I don't even consider myself a great leader. So, you got to continue to train and I don't know that there are any sort of people that are just born good leaders. I think they're built that way and they're trained that way, and it takes a lot of hard work on their end as well. So yeah, it takes a willingness to change oneself and to reflect. So yeah, it takes introspection and humility and but commitment, transparency, and empathy mostly.
Are you a fan in Web3 of big, hairy, audacious goals or managed expectations?
Um, that's a good question. Every project has to be ambitious, but like there's so much already like happening right now that I'm already excited about. So it's even hard to get excited about things that are coming when there's already so much that's like here right now or just launched yesterday that you can go try out and have fun with. So if you got an ambitious roadmap, more power to you. I guess when I see a project that has like a really long roadmap, I kind of wonder like why, make it happen already. Or it does make me wonder if there's a really long roadmap, like what's the holdup? Are they really going to be around that long? Does it really take that long? Some projects, yes, it's absolutely true. But some projects, it's clear that, that the website was built to raise money and, the actual, there's nothing really of substance that's going to come from this. So you definitely have to have a very, very good filter when you're checking out all these projects.
Do you think from an engineer's perspective that bug bounties are a good thing that helps engineers and cybersecurity professionals get sharper? Or do you think it's a way that corporations kind of get off of hiring a senior developer to look at these types of things? Like, what do you think about crowdsourcing exploits?
Oh no, I think it's good. Yeah, there was a good tweet on this that was said, If you are so confident in your code, then let's see you open source it and then go on vacation and put $1 million bug bounty on it. Because that's what these projects have done, right? And not only that, not only is there $1 million bug bounty, but there are billions of dollars at stake, in transactions. And if somebody is able to exploit these things, they could, if they don't care about getting caught, they could potentially steal billions of dollars, and they have. And so there is literally so much on the line, and yeah, so I think that there's a lot of people who trivialize this stuff, but it's open source, it's all right there, and it's there for the taking. So if you think you can do better, come get some. So yeah, I think that's definitely the way to do it. There needs to be red hat teams on the offensive. You can't just not have security, and you can't just assume that your developers are going to do security, or assume that you want to ship something stable, right? And so if you ship something that's totally full of bugs, then it's going to get hacked on like day 1 or 2 or whatever, and then the project's over. So I think you got to spend money on security in more ways than one. You got to front load the security, and then you got to fund that bug bounty, ideally, in order to incentivize people to report it instead of exploit it. Because if they exploit it, they could kill your business. But if they report it, that's obviously good for everyone involved.
Yeah, I'm always encouraged to see that a lot of big companies, I think Coinbase paid someone for a 0-day exploit at the highest critical level for $250,000. And I like it when companies will shell out, but I think the hacks a lot of times will help them get there. Because like you say, it's disproportionate. Like it's either $1 billion down the road or give me a little bit right now.
That hack was insane. I mean, if you look at the specifics, all he did was hit a URL request. I mean, he made an AJAX request and changed. He basically sent an AJAX request saying, "I want to sell some Bitcoin that I don't own," and they're like, "Yep, all right, your sell order has been placed." I mean, it's a hack, I guess, but it's like about the easiest hack. He made a very easy $250,000. Put it that way. So he's very lucky that he found it first.
That can be, yeah, because they lose faith in the platform, and that's never good for investors.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on forks? Is that good, or is that a use of someone else's IP? From your vantage point, like, do you feel good about a fork if it's a meaningful community and effort behind it, or are you've kind of circumspect if it's a similar code?
Well, I mean, a fork in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with a fork. If this is open source software development, and so if a software license permits someone to fork the code and to use it for their own purposes, and they're doing that within the original license agreement, there's nothing wrong with that. I think the decision to fork an existing project should not be taken lightly. It's like, why are you for? Like, I guess you'd have to get into the rationale behind the fork. Like, is your intent to take the community and run? Are you trying to supplant the original product, or are you doing it to build something new and better and different? So they're not inherently good or bad. It's just a thing you can do on GitHub.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. From my perspective, I wonder if it wasn't so easy to fork, whether people would work things out in the DAO or have meaningful conversations, as opposed to rage quit. But a lot of times it's easier just to get that clean cut.
Oh yeah, so yeah, you're talking about in the context of like when you can't reach consensus, right? So you've got some disagreement. And well, what I'd like to say is, forking is actually less common these days than it was back in the day, and that's probably thanks to the prevalence of DAOs, right? So now we have DAOs where we're able to take our conflicts and put them out, air them out, and have actual sort of on-chain governance where we can behave like civilized adults, and we don't have to rage quit and fork and get in these public arguments anymore. I think that's probably why you see less forks. Well, also that, and there's a million projects, and it's just not really lucrative to do that anymore. But yeah, there's better ways to solve your problems now.
During the early days, you'll remember too that a lot of the blockchain projects would collaborate, and there wasn't that like businesses trying to withhold information. I mean, they'd actively share information because the narrative was that a rising tide lifts all ships, and it's like the ultimate goal is mass adoption. and it still seems like there's a certain amount of that. But is there that congeniality in all of tech, or what are your thoughts on like how blockchain distinguishes itself from other tech as it relates to the community's perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have to be careful because obviously I work at a for-profit blockchain company now, and there's a lot of activity in this space in terms of mergers, acquisitions, always happening. And so, there's on the one hand, yeah, people are competing, but on the other hand, I think most of us recognize, or at least hopefully are of the mindset that life in general is not a zero-sum game. Things can be win-win, and if we stand on each other's shoulders, we can achieve much greater things than we otherwise would have. And so I think most people come to it from that angle. Yeah, it's like mass adoption. I just saw a tweet where it said like there will be a day where everybody has a Web3 wallet of some sort. There are currently about 68 million of them. So like when you think about it like that, yeah, okay, we're still pretty dang early. And so I don't know. I think there's still this air of collegiality and wanting to help each other. And there's also a very much, I would say, traditional mechanisms for enforcement are still very much frowned upon. Patents, in general, I get the impression that they're not really something that is desired in Web3. And so yeah, traditional IP sometimes can go out the window, at least on sort of face value. I mean, I think if push comes to shove, some of these, there will be cases, there will be patent infringement cases and copyright infringement cases in the Web3 space. But in general, I'd say it's kind of an agreement not to pursue those things, because what I heard is it's a signal that we were unable to come to consensus using new mechanisms, and so falling back to the old mechanism is kind of a failure of us as technologists.
Yeah, no, I just remember always being struck that in traditional Silicon Valley, they would have tacit understandings that we're not going to poach each other's talent. And it seems like the competitiveness was so intense, but in Web3, like they're giving you airdrops, they're weaving you into different projects, they're making introductions across these huge projects. That was definitely refreshing to see.
Yeah, it's still very friendly for sure.
What do you think in terms of a takeaway? Like if you talk to someone that wants to get into the space, is there any sort of parting words you might give them to encourage them to try to put their toe into the very intimidating Southern California tech scene to get a job?
To get into SoCal tech in general, yeah, I would say, find what you want to do. Watch some YouTube videos, take some tutorials, check out Figma, design an app, build some stuff, tinker, or find a project that you already like, that you're a fan of, and join the community and help them in some way. That's actually a really good way to find a job, especially in Web3 right now. If you want to get a job in Web3, just find a project you like, hop on their community, and start doing that job. And in no time, either they will have funding or something will happen, and you'll have a reputation built up, and you'll find yourself with plenty of work. So that's how I would get into blockchain. But tech in general, I guess YouTube tutorials, videos, mentors. Seek out a mentor who's in the space, and ask them for help. I think that's also hugely important.
What's your most active social media account?
My most active social media account is probably on Twitter, where I'm pseudonymous, but it's Blanky1337. Yeah.
Great. And to wrap it up, any last question you might want to ask me?
Yeah. So you interview a lot of, or I'm sorry, you have a lot of students who are, masters and professionals, and they're getting into the space. Where do you see things moving in the next 1 to 3 years?
Well, I think what's most exciting about LA is that it's really a confluence of tech and entertainment, mass media. So I know that the interest in NFTs was huge, continues to be huge, and the partnerships down the road portend that it's going to continue to do well. And I think that it's like I was telling someone the other day, you had the early days when Beeple was huge, and then it led that singular point of focus to many projects that were huge. And then the byproduct and the residue was that independent artists and photographers were actually getting commissions. They were getting speculative buys, which is great because a lot of them were so talented and they could only get commissions on Fiverr or something like on a low level like that could not support themselves. So I think that stands a great chance to do well. And DeFi, as a result of the way that things have bounced back as a result of the worldwide instability. And I think most people that I saw, I looked on Facebook today, and a bunch of people that I didn't even know knew anything about crypto were sending Ukrainians Bitcoin in order to support their efforts to vacate the country. So the instability meshed with the inflation, I think, portends good things for DeFi. But in LA, what's first and foremost on everyone's lips, and is, I would say, the most of interest to our students, is NFTs, just because you have all the major media organizations trying to do something in it. You have Tom Brady with his autographs project that he's weaving in Tiger Woods and Steph Curry. And it seems like everyone in the city is trying to do something, Mila Kunis, Ashton Kutcher with their Web3 cartoon project. And so I think for at least the foreseeable future, that's going to do well. And going back to the earlier question that I asked you, if I had to ask myself, I think that baking royalties into the actual smart contract was so genius because that lasted a minute in California with the resale rights being given back to the artists. And if you and I owned an art studio, it's like we want to give every possible resource to our artists to get single person shows to grow their brand as best they could. So it only makes sense. And to see that Johnny Depp has an NFT project, that Damien Hirst has a redemptive one, you send an NFT, you can put something on your wall. That's, I think, going to be real exciting. And I'm hoping to join the ranks of you and have some cool NFT art to put on my wall soon.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, that Damien Hirst project, I think, was actually done by my team here at ConsenSys, as well as a bunch of other fun stuff that's coming. Yeah, and Snoop Dogg has music art. You can buy his beats as NFTs, and you can use them in your songs and mix them up. So yeah, this is the creator economy that we've been waiting for. It's really cool.
Thanks for coming by for the hour interview, Dylan.
Right on. Thanks, Rob.